Okay, so I know this is going to sound absolutely wild, and honestly, even thinking back on it now, I still can't quite believe it actually happened. Was I wrong for what I did? Did I go too far? Or was I justified in protecting my future mother-in-law? You guys are going to have to tell me, because I'm still processing it all. Imagine this, the most beautiful, meticulously planned wedding you could ever envision. Every detail perfect, every guest beaming, every moment captured by professional photographers and videographers. And then, in the middle of this picture-perfect reception, the bride, my soon-to-be sister-in-law, mind you, raises her hand and delivers a resounding, open-palmed slap across the face of one of the servers. Not just any server, though. It was my mother-in-law, her fiancé's mother, my husband-to-be's mother, the woman who was supposed to be celebrating the union of her son and this woman. Yeah, you heard that right. A slap. At her own wedding. To her future mother-in-law, who she didn't recognize because she was secretly working as a server to help pay for the very wedding she was attending. Just tell me, honestly, would you have reacted the same way I did? Let me take you back to the beginning, before the chaos, before the slap, before everything imploded. My name is Sarah, and my now husband, Mark, and I had been together for almost 5 years when this whole saga unfolded. Mark has an older brother, David, who is getting married to a woman named Jessica. From the moment I met Jessica, I knew she was a lot. She was incredibly beautiful, no doubt about it, with a striking presence and a confidence that bordered on arrogance. She came from money, or at least her family had a reputation for it, and she carried herself with an air of entitlement that was, frankly, exhausting. Mark and I, on the other hand, come from much more modest backgrounds. Mark's mother, Carol, is a single mom who worked incredibly hard her whole life to raise her 2 boys. She's one of the kindest, most selfless people I've ever met, always putting her sons first, always making sacrifices. She works 2 jobs, sometimes 3, just to make ends meet and ensure her boys had opportunities she never did. One of those jobs was as a caterer and event server, something she did on weekends and evenings to supplement her income from her primary job as a school administrative assistant. She's really good at it, too, professional, efficient, always with a warm smile. When David and Jessica got engaged, it was a whirlwind. Jessica had very specific, very expensive tastes. She wanted a fairy tale wedding, and she wasn't shy about making that known. David, bless his heart, was completely smitten and seemed willing to do whatever it took to make her happy. This meant a venue that cost more than a down payment on a house, a designer gown that was eye-wateringly expensive, and a guest list that included half of the city's elite, most of whom neither David nor Jessica actually knew well. Carol, being the amazing mother she is, immediately offered to help with whatever she could. Jessica, however, wasn't interested in help that didn't involve a blank check. She made it clear that she wanted a high-class affair and that she didn't want anything that might cheapen the event. This was a subtle but clear dig at Carol's more practical suggestions, like making some of the decorations herself or using a more budget-friendly florist. Carol, ever the peacemaker, just smiled and said she understood. But I saw the flicker of hurt in her eyes. Mark saw it too. We both knew Carol just wanted to be involved, to contribute to her son's special day. As the wedding planning progressed, the financial strain on David became apparent. He was trying to keep up with Jessica's demands, but he wasn't a millionaire. He took out loans, worked extra hours, and was constantly stressed. Jessica, meanwhile, seemed oblivious, or perhaps just uncaring. She'd casually suggest things like a live string quartet for the cocktail hour or a custom ice sculpture, totally disregarding the already ballooning budget. One evening, about 2 months before the wedding, Carol called me. Her voice was a little strained, and she sounded tired. She told me she had picked up an extra catering gig for a big wedding coming up, and it would involve working the entire reception as a server. She said it was good money and would help her save up a bit more to contribute to David's gift. I didn't think much of it at the time, other than admiring her tireless dedication. She didn't mention whose wedding it was, and honestly, why would she? She works so many of these events. I just told her to make sure she wasn't overdoing it. Fast forward to the wedding day. It was indeed a lavish affair. The venue was breathtaking, A grand ballroom in an old, historic hotel. The flowers were exquisite, the music elegant, and the food smelled incredible. Mark and I arrived early to help Carol with a few last-minute things for her seating chart contributions, but she seemed distant, preoccupied. She kept making excuses to disappear, saying she had to check on something or help with an urgent issue. I noticed she was dressed a little differently than usual for a guest, a simple black dress, practical shoes, but still lovely. I just figured she was trying to be comfortable. I gave her a hug and told her how proud I was of everything she'd done for David. She smiled, a little sadly I thought, and then quickly excused herself. The ceremony was beautiful, if a bit stiff. Jessica looked stunning, like a princess from a fairy tale, and David looked incredibly handsome, albeit a little nervous. During the cocktail hour, Mark and I were mingling, catching up with relatives, and generally enjoying the celebratory atmosphere. I saw Carol occasionally, darting around with trays of champagne and appetizers, always professional, always smiling politely at the guests. It struck me as a little odd that she was so actively involved, almost like a staff member, but then I remembered her earlier evasiveness and simply thought she was just being her usual helpful self, going above and beyond to make sure everything ran smoothly for her son. I waved to her once, and she gave a quick, almost imperceptible nod back, a slight frown on her face before she quickly resumed her duties. It was then that I started to feel a prickle of unease. Something wasn't quite right. The reception began, and everyone moved into the grand ballroom. The speeches were lovely, if a little long-winded, and the first dance was perfectly choreographed. Jessica was radiant, basking in the attention, holding David's hand and smiling for all the cameras. As the evening progressed and the open bar flowed freely, the atmosphere became more relaxed, louder. The dance floor filled, and a buzz of excited chatter filled the air. That's when I saw her again, Carol. She was circulating among the tables, clearing plates, refilling water glasses, ensuring everything was tidy. She was doing a fantastic job, completely blending in with the other catering staff. No one seemed to notice she was anything more than just another server. It was clear she was deliberately keeping a low profile, avoiding eye contact with any family members. My heart ached for her. I started to piece it together then. The extra catering gig she'd mentioned. The secretive behavior. The way she was dressed. She wasn't just helping out. She was working. As a server. At her own son's wedding. I pulled Mark aside, my voice a whisper. Mark, look at your mom. She's not just helping. She's working. Mark followed my gaze, and his face slowly turned from confusion to shock, then to a simmering anger. No way, he muttered, shaking his head. She wouldn't. Not here. But he knew, just like I did, that she absolutely would. That was Carol. Always sacrificing, always putting her family first, even if it meant humbling herself to ensure their happiness, even if it meant being practically invisible at her own son's most important day. The realization hit us like a ton of bricks. She must have taken the job to help pay for the wedding, perhaps to cover some unexpected cost or to contribute without Jessica finding out and rejecting the money. It was a heartbreaking thought. She was serving at her son's wedding, essentially working to fund the very event she was a guest of honor at, all while being treated as invisible by the bride. We decided to keep it to ourselves for the moment. We didn't want to embarrass Carol or cause a scene at the wedding, especially since she was clearly trying to remain unnoticed. We planned to talk to her later to try and understand the full extent of what was happening. But then, things took a turn for the worse. Jessica, having had a few too many glasses of champagne, was in full bridezilla mode. She was striding around the reception hall, micromanaging everything, snapping at waiters, and generally being quite demanding. Her maid of honor was trying to gently rein her in, but Jessica was on a power trip. David, looking increasingly uncomfortable, was trying to diffuse situations, but his attempts were largely ignored. This is where the absolute nightmare began. Carol, my wonderful, selfless mother-in-law, was making her way through the tables, clearing empty champagne flutes and discarded napkins. She was near the head table, where Jessica was holding court, loudly complaining about the music being too slow for dancing, despite the fact that the dance floor was packed. Carol was carefully balancing a tray of glasses when, suddenly, Jessica extended her arm dramatically, gesturing wildly as she made a point about the DJ. In her drunken enthusiasm, she accidentally knocked into Carol's arm. The tray wobbled, and a single, half-empty champagne flute slipped and fell, landing with a soft thud on the pristine white tablecloth. It didn't break, but a small splash of bubbly liquid spread, leaving a damp stain. It was a tiny incident, easily remedied, barely noticeable amidst the grandeur of the wedding. But Jessica reacted as if a bomb had gone off. She stopped mid-sentence, her eyes narrowing on Carol. "What in the world do you think you're doing?" she shrieked, her voice cutting through the general chatter. All eyes turned towards them. Carol, mortified, immediately began apologizing profusely. "Oh my goodness, I am so sorry, ma'am. It was an accident. I'll clean it up right away." She was already reaching for a napkin, her face flushed with embarrassment. But Jessica wasn't having it. "An accident? You just ruined my tablecloth. My expensive, custom-made tablecloth. Do you know how much this cost? You clumsy idiot." Her voice was shrill, laced with pure venom. Guests started to murmur, looking uncomfortable. David had turned bright red and was trying to intervene, but Jessica brushed him off. Carol stood there, frozen, her head bowed. She was being publicly humiliated at her son's wedding by her future daughter-in-law, who had no idea who she was. Mark had started to move forward, his fists clenched, a furious expression on his face. I grabbed his arm, holding him back, because I knew if he went over there right then, it would only escalate. We needed to handle this carefully. But before I could even formulate a plan, before David could say anything coherent, Jessica did the unthinkable. She actually raised her hand, her eyes blazing with fury, and delivered a sharp, loud slap across Carol's face. The sound echoed through the suddenly silent ballroom. A collective gasp went through the crowd. Carol staggered back, her hand flying to her cheek, her eyes wide with shock and unshed tears. The air crackled with stunned disbelief. Jessica stood there, chest heaving, a look of triumph mixed with drunken rage on her face. And that was it. That was the moment everything changed. I saw red. All the anger, all the frustration, all the hurt I felt for Carol, it just exploded. My mother-in-law, the kindest woman I know, slapped and humiliated for an accidental spill while she was working to help pay for this woman's extravagant wedding. No. Absolutely not. So that's the situation I was in, and I had to make a choice. Here was my kind, selfless mother-in-law, publicly shamed and physically assaulted by her future daughter-in-law, who was completely oblivious to her true identity and sacrifice. And Mark was practically vibrating with rage beside me. Before I tell you what happened next, I want you to pause and comment below what you would have done in my shoes. Would you have let it go, try to smooth things over? Or would you have reacted exactly as I did? Seriously, I need to know if I was out of line here. The silence in the ballroom was deafening, thick with tension. Every single eye was on Jessica, then on Carol, then back to Jessica. David finally snapped out of his stupor. "Jessica, what in God's name was that?" he yelled, grabbing her arm. But she shrugged him off. She deserved it. "Look what she did," she slurred, pointing at the tiny champagne stain. That was my cue. I let go of Mark's arm, walked purposefully towards the head table, my heels clicking loudly on the marble floor. I could feel Mark right behind me, his silent support a concrete weight against my back. I stopped directly in front of Jessica, my eyes locked onto hers. Her triumphant smirk faltered as she saw the sheer fury in my gaze. "You pathetic, disgusting excuse for a human being," I said, my voice low and steady, but laced with a venom that made her flinch. "You have absolutely no idea what you've just done, do you?" She tried to retort, to puff herself up, but I cut her off. "This woman," I said, turning and gently placing a hand on Carol's trembling shoulder, "this incredible, selfless woman you just slapped, you just publicly humiliated, is Carol." She is David's mother. She is your future mother-in-law. The words hung in the air, heavy and undeniable. Jessica's eyes, previously filled with drunken rage, went wide with a dawning horror. Her mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water. David, who had been trying to comfort his mother, now looked at Jessica with an expression of utter disbelief and disgust. The guests started whispering, a low rumble of shock spreading through the room. Carol, still reeling, shook her head slightly, a silent plea for me to stop, to not make a bigger scene. But I couldn't. Not after what she'd just endured. She wasn't just a server here, Jessica. I continued, my voice gaining strength, projecting across the ballroom. She was working to help pay for your lavish wedding. She took an extra job, a catering gig, to ensure that her son, David, could give you everything you demanded. She sacrificed her pride, her comfort, her role as the mother of the groom, just so you could have your perfect, expensive day. And you just slapped her. You slapped the woman who dedicated her life to raising the man you're supposedly marrying, the woman who was secretly working to fund your dream. How dare you? Jessica's face drained of all color. The realization of what she had done, the monumental mistake, the absolute public catastrophe she had created, hit her like a tidal wave. She stammered, No, that's not. I didn't know. She looked at Carol, then at David, then back at me, her eyes pleading, desperate. But there was no sympathy from me, or from Mark, who had now stepped forward to stand protectively beside his mother. You didn't know? Mark's voice was a low growl, far more terrifying than my measured anger. Of course you didn't know, because you don't care about anyone but yourself. You're so self-absorbed, so entitled, that you couldn't even recognize the woman who raised your fiancé, the woman who was literally serving you food and drinks tonight. He turned to David, his expression heartbroken. David, how could you let this happen? How could you let Mom do this? And how could you ever marry someone who would treat her like this? David was torn. He looked at his mother, tears streaming down her face, then at his bride, who was now trembling with a mix of shame and fear. He looked at Mark and me, his eyes filled with anguish. Mom, He started, his voice cracking. Carol just shook her head, a single, silent tear escaping and tracing a path down her slapped cheek. It was too much for her. She turned and, with as much dignity as she could muster, walked swiftly out of the ballroom, disappearing into the service hallway. Well, congratulations, Jessica, I said, my voice dripping with sarcasm. You've successfully ruined your own wedding, and you've shown everyone here exactly what kind of person you truly are. Mark then stepped fully in front of me, facing David. David, you need to make a choice right now. Your mother or her. Because if you choose her, you choose to condone this. And if you condone this, you lose us. You lose your family. The ballroom was in an uproar now. Guests were talking loudly, some openly condemning Jessica, others looking shocked. Jessica's family, who had previously been quite boisterous, were now huddled together, looking utterly mortified. Jessica herself looked like a deer caught in headlights. She tried to reach for David, but he pulled away. He looked around the room, at the wreckage of his perfect day, at the disgusted faces, at the empty space where his mother had just been. Then he made his decision. Slowly, deliberately, David took off the boutonniere from his lapel, the one Jessica had painstakingly picked out. He placed it carefully on the head table, beside the tiny champagne stain. He then took off his wedding ring, the one he had just put on an hour ago, and placed it next to the boutonniere. He looked at Jessica, his eyes cold and empty. It's over, Jessica, he said, his voice quiet but firm. I cannot marry someone who would treat my mother or any human being with such contempt. This wedding is off. Jessica gasped, a strangled cry escaping her lips. Her elegant facade crumbled completely. She started to sob, loud and uninhibited, collapsing into a chair at the head table. Her maid of honor rushed to her side, but it was too late. David didn't even look back. He turned, his gaze sweeping over Mark and me, a silent apology in his eyes. He then walked purposefully towards the service hallway, following the path his mother had taken. Mark immediately went after him, putting a comforting arm around his brother. I watched them go, a strange mix of sadness and vindication washing over me. The reception quickly dissolved into chaos. Guests started leaving, talking animatedly about the unbelievable scene they had just witnessed. Jessica's family tried to smooth things over, but there was no salvaging the situation. The wedding was definitively over. Later that evening, after everything had settled down, Mark, David, and I found Carol in her small apartment. She was sitting on her sofa, still in her black server's dress, staring blankly ahead. David knelt in front of her, his voice full of remorse. "Mom, I am so sorry. I had no idea you were working. I never would have allowed it." Carol finally broke down, tears flowing freely. "I just wanted to help, David. I saw how stressed you were about the costs, and I wanted you to have a beautiful day. I didn't want Jessica to know, because I knew she'd be upset." David held her tightly, promising her he would make it right. He told her about calling off the wedding, about his decision. Carol, despite everything, was heartbroken for David. She wasn't angry at him, just sad for the way things had turned out. Mark and I assured her that she had done nothing wrong, that she was the most incredible mother, and that we were all so proud of her. It took a long time for her to truly believe us, to shake off the humiliation and hurt. Jessica tried to apologize, of course, through text messages and calls to David, but he never responded. The engagement was unequivocally broken. The fallout was immense. Jessica's family was furious, initially at David, then at Jessica for her atrocious behavior. The wedding vendors had to be paid, and David was left with a mountain of debt, but his family rallied around him. Mark and I helped him as much as we could, and Carol, despite her own financial struggles, offered what little she had saved. It was a tough period, but David slowly healed. He eventually paid off the debts, got a new job, and started fresh. He learned a hard lesson about looking beyond superficial beauty and truly understanding a person's character. He and Carol grew even closer, and he's now fiercely protective of her. So, that's the story of the wedding that ended with a slap. It was a terrible, awful day, but it also exposed the truth and ultimately saved David from a marriage that would have undoubtedly been miserable. Carol eventually found a new, better-paying job, and she never had to work another catering gig again. She's now thriving, surrounded by people who cherish and respect her. Looking back, I still don't regret what I did. I couldn't stand by and watch that happen to Carol, to such a kind and selfless woman. Was it dramatic? Absolutely. Did it cause a huge scene? You betcha. But sometimes, you have to be the one to stand up for what's right, even if it means blowing up a perfectly planned wedding. So, what do you think? Was I right to expose Jessica and defend Carol? Let me know your thoughts in the comment section below. If you found this story as wild as I did, please like this video. It really helps the channel. And if you want to hear more jaw-dropping, emotional, and sometimes infuriating stories like this one, make sure you hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you don't miss out. Share your final thoughts on this whole mess in the comment section. I'm really curious to hear your take. I'll see you all in the next story.